What is the orientation of your astral body, and how can we evolve this? Can our emotions be hijacked? These will be our topics in today's episode of the Maverick Mystic Arts podcast. When we begin the spiritual journey, the orientation of the astral body becomes very, very important. It is through the astral body that acts as a type of, we might say like a pivot point between substantial and insubstantial, that the trajectory of our path can be either pulled off course or set to the fast and narrow. Now, one of the easiest ways for the astral body to be pulled off the course of the spiritual path is through the stimulation of strong instinctual emotion and, of course, the view and perspective that comes from the stimulation of instinct. Now, instinct is very often confused for intuition. This is incredibly common in people who have a interest in the spiritual path and an ego that is of the spiritual, in the sense that I'm a spiritual person, I have precognitive abilities, prophetic abilities, and so my feelings are therefore an indication of what is true or what is coming in the future. Having your feelings be an indication towards what is true is one of the most common ones, and we want to be careful of this because most often this is instinct, which comes down to self-preservation, not intuition, which pulls us towards spiritual evolution. Now, of course, these work together and evolve. However, we want to have developed strong discernment at many layers of the vibrational scale so that we can really understand this with a more honest perspective. Now, to stimulate the instinctual mind, the survival instinct, things like scarcity, any type of projection or message of scarcity, of not enough, I don't have enough, these will stimulate that instinctual mind. And once the instinctual mind is stimulated, the discernment of truth, of the the truth of your thoughts, the purity of your thoughts, your ideas, these are very difficult to pull apart when you are under siege of the instinctual mind. So scarcity, projections, messages of social acceptance or rejection, us and them. This is absolutely gigantic, right? Our community does this. People who are smart do this or that, which means people who don't do this are stupid, right? Strong feelings. When strong feelings are encouraged through a narrative, internally imposed or externally imposed, we want to be very wary. So when evidence of a message is based on a story, this should perk up our curiosity. Things like, it's true because I said so. It's true because this group says so. It's true because good people think this. It's true because smart people think this. Evolved people think this. Because humble people think this. Because virtuous people think this. All of these point towards the opposite, which is, if you don't agree with this narrative, this point of view, you are not good, you are bad, you are not smart, you are stupid, you are not evolved, you are a Neanderthal, you are not humble, you are arrogant, you are not virtuous, you are whatever the opposite of that is. So all of these instinctual views and emotions, these suppress the cognitive capacity to discern truth, to discern honesty, to discern from a place of equanimity. And this is one of the big things that the practice along the spiritual path helps us to overcome, and of course then move towards the opposite, which is more clarity. When the body is under siege, whether it is through sickness, right, or through physical imposition, you're being beat up, if the emotions are under attack through these various forms of narrative co-opting and control, if the mental perspective is once again being poked and prodded at from all angles, the need of an individual who succumbs to the tyrant of identity, well, that identity seeks to find a foothold in any side of this, in any narrative. Again, that narrative could be internally induced or externally imposed. So it's very important that we, along the path, learn to discern beyond the static that stress induces. So, personal example, I had been doing for several years, this is quite a while back, a lot of samadhi-based meditation, concentration-based meditation, a lot of that. And then I started to get these peculiar injuries, the concussion-type symptoms, and omnipresent nausea, vertigo, dizziness that sort of stuck around for a very, very, very long time, many years. And I noticed about 6 months into this that the stress, the confusion, the stress that the systems, the organs, the perceptual capacities, the sense gates, the equilibrium orientation, all of this stuff, the stress on that was reaching a point where I could no longer trust my thoughts. And this was a very interesting process to be part of as it was unfolding, because I moved from a very clear discernment and clear perspective from always being in this very, very still, silent place to attempting to perceive and discern from a very, very tumultuous oceans, stormy oceans that ship of discernment was sailing on. And this took a long time to learn how to work with and evolve to the next layer. So we want to be wary of this and be able to hopefully perceive when those that cognitive capacity of discernment is being suppressed and is being held hostage by story-based evidence. The story of identity that we develop throughout our life, or the story of identity that is being hoisted upon us by the external environment. An aspect of the evolution of the spiritual path that is not talked about too much is the cognitive dissonance that one goes through. Now, cognitive dissonance is something that arises when new information clashes with long-held beliefs, or when confusion is set into motion to pull apart the alignment of the mental, astral, and physical bodies. So the idea clashes with the habitual astral emotions, and then the action can as well be different from the astral identity that we've often clung to and the patterns of perception and of view. So any one of these gets hijacked or set off to a different course. Now, in the spiritual path, you are evolving, so you end up going through this type of thing a lot. The rapid opening of the matrices and defabrication of everything that has existed in its habitual forms up to that point, then the reorientation to a higher, more refined aspect of your spiritual path, and then reorientation, realignment, recohesion within this new, more refined paradigm. Now, anything that is a natural internal process of change can be used externally to influence the internal. And this is where in cults, spiritual communities, any type of psyop that is being, thrown at you, these things, these innate ways that we are pulled apart and put back together are used. So why is this so effective? It's because weakness is created as the resonant alignment of mental, astral, and physical is dismantled. And then it is put back together, either under higher spiritual purview or under nefarious means, as in most cults and most ideologies and most societal pushes in one direction or another. So the identity finds itself on precarious footing when the resonant alignment has been dismantled. Because the identity finds itself on precarious footing, it is seeking alignment, it's seeking coherence, it's seeking strength in that alignment for comfort. This is why the courage to exist within the place of the unknown is so important on the spiritual path, and so important in maintaining clarity of view and perspective. The lack of need to have a view, to have a perspective, this becomes one of our greatest tools on the path and in sustaining our orientation towards truth. A tool of those who are of nefarious means attempting to use cognitive dissonance against an individual is through the actions of micro agreements, these little agreements that you make usually to fit in, right? Now, these come into play as means of conceding one small step at a time to a new narrative for of your current identity. So one of the reasons this is so effective is because most people will do anything to continue being right or good or moral, virtuous, whatever the program that's being run is telling you are. Because we want to continue to be right, that would mean that after we've conceded to a number of these little micro agreements, to go against that would be to acknowledge that we made a mistake, that we perhaps had been manipulated, and the what it takes to admit to having been manipulated, that's a strong thing. That's a strong resistance to that most of us have. It takes a lot to be able to acknowledge that we've been manipulated. To not be wrong and to admit to being duped, this is a big difference. To admit to being duped is hard, so we double down on the micro agreements that we've already made. Because it's one little thing at a time, we don't really notice. So if we look at this as, let's say, little actions, like, okay, in this community, we don't use these words, we do use these words. In this ideology, we don't use these words, we use these words. We don't have these views, we have these views. Little things, you acquiesce to using certain words, and then you've done that. So what's the next thing? Okay, well, maybe it's little actions. Okay, well, we greet each other in this way. Okay, so it's still words, but now it's a type of greeting. Now it's, over time, starting to corrode your habits of interaction, of how you connect between one perceived entity and another. And this happens over and over again. So if you look at in war, there's examples of, there's this one in, I think it might have been in Poland. I'll have to check the name again. But these soldiers, one step at a time, went from what do you call it? Imprisoning their fellow countrymen and just sort of keeping them in a localized space to, over the course of 9 months, shooting pregnant women in the head and the belly. Like, this is, pretty terrible stuff. But it didn't happen at the beginning. It wasn't, okay, go here, do this terrible thing. It was, go here. Okay, now say maybe you separate people within the group. You put the men over here, the women over here. Okay, now maybe if they don't do what you say for the order of the place, then you can reprimand. And then that reprimanding, okay, well, now it's okay to reprimand a little harder. And now it's okay to use some physical force. Now it's okay to engage in, minor acts of you start with like the making fun of, and then that becomes, throwing rocks, and that becomes torture and beatings. And it never starts at the full escalation. It starts small and slowly gets stronger and stronger. And these are the micro agreements that we make. What lines do you allow to be crossed? What lines do you cross? And to what degree does your code of ethics hold true to your highest self? Now, appeals to virtue, of course, are very powerful. If we are having our minds being swayed in a political direction, one way or the other, or to potentially nefarious action. So things like think of the children. If you don't agree with me, you're not thinking of the children. That makes you a terrible person, because good people obviously think of the children. I have watched the same people, the same person even, within a couple of weeks go from the most terrible thing you can do is to steal a child from their parents, say in the umbrella of what happened with the residential schools in BC, and these terrible things that occurred where colonialists pulled children away from their parents and set people up in these residential schools and smashed out culture and did some very, very terrible things. The same person who says that 2 weeks later is going, oh, well, if a parent, doesn't agree to undergo experimental medical procedures, their child should be taken away from them. Same action is being now held up as good, whereas the same action 2 weeks earlier was held up as bad. So we need to look at this and go, okay, what is the actual truth of what's going on? And what's my attachment to story that has allowed me to view this action of stealing a child from their parents in one setting as terrible, and then in another setting as good? Is it that the devil's in the details? Or is it that my identity has been swept into the current of a particular narrative? Selfless people comply. Selfish people don't. Is that true? Are you selfish? Or are you simply not buying into a narrative? It's very easy to sway an identity narrative through encouraging what appear to be virtuous qualities. Even Carl Sagan had a quote that was not so good. That a lot of people repeat. The highest arrogance. It's the highest arrogance to believe that we are alone in this universe, something to that effect in relation to extraterrestrial life. Now, what does that imply? It implies that if you don't agree with that, you are very, very arrogant. And while you might be, you might not be. But the implication of being looked at as arrogant might sway one into simply agreeing with that statement instead of looking at it from a more clear-headed perspective. So the question of, am I being encouraged to identify with a group, with specific actions, with an ideology, with a belief system? This question is always a good one to run. And it's not only valuable from the perspective of looking at external influence and trying to intellectually figure out where manipulation might be coming from, but, and probably most importantly, it's a good question when looking at your own motivations. What are the motivations behind the actions that you're taking, behind the ideology, the narrative, the belief system that you might be upholding and then propagating throughout your spheres of influence? This is at the crux of the spiritual path. Who are you? What is this thing? And as we go deeper, we find, of course, that we are not our identities that we've for so long held aloft. We are not the narratives, the stories that we've held on to. Our belief systems, they get let go of. And as one progresses on the path, all of the narrative, all of the story, the belief systems, everything that you thought about yourself, any excuse you had for how and why you acted different ways, you're always looking at the motivations underlying your thought, your emotion, and your action. As you refine and equalize with more refined aspects of light up the vibrational scale, the densities of the narratives that have been held in place start to erode. As they erode, new orientation is allowed to come into being. The orientation of the astral body, of the identity, at whatever layer it still needs to exist, comes into alignment with higher refinements of light. It literally rewires us and remakes us. This is looking at the foundation for all of this, because it's, again, very difficult to be persuaded one way or another when there isn't a thing to be persuaded. There isn't a thing that needs to think one way or another. There isn't an identity that needs to, for safety, be part of a group dynamic, a group thought pattern, a group consciousness. Now, from a training perspective, there are explorations and exercises that can help with this. So in Hermetics, for example, we do a lot of work exploring the elements, training the elements, building the energy of the elements, equalizing with each element, building the intensity of the elements, so you develop a strong resilience to the pressure of that element, a strong familiarity with that element, and of course eventually find some equalization with it. Now, when the elements have been trained to such a degree that emotions are perceived as the movements of energy and are associated with free-flowing energy instead of compartmentalized meaning, or the stagnation that is that compartmentalized meaning, this allows for the elements to ebb and flow. This allows for the energy to move. When we are locked in to, it's like, let's say you have the fire element and you take a bucket, a container, and you put a little bit of the fire element in that container, and that container says, anger. Okay, now that energy, the presence of the fire element, means anger because it's stuck in that container. But as soon as we flip that container over or dissolve the container, dissolve the stagnation, dissolve the compartmentalization, what you have left over is undifferentiated fire element. So instead of working with the little bucket, that bucket no longer has a story or a narrative to hold it there. Because there's no narrative to hold it there, you just have the fire element, which can be then tweaked into use as, say, courage or any other positive fire attribute of discipline, of perseverance, of tenacity. These are all potentials, right? So it's the compartmentalizations of the elements, of giving their presence the meaning of little tiny encapsulated meanings that we kind of run amok, that the energy and emotions get hijacked and pulled into those little tiny, sub-meanings. So we dissolve these, and we now are with the elements at play. Earth, water, air, and fire are able to flow through. Because they're able to move, they're able to harmonize and adjust and balance. Some are able to grow and then, transmute and change, because nothing is being pinned down. And the need of an identity to be accepted, to hold a view, hold an opinion, is pinning down the energy. So once we can free this up, it allows the elements to move. Because the elements are free to move, they are able to reorientate into a more refined, resonant alignment within the astral body and field. The momentary containers of the element, those are, that's just a brief housing of the element, is the compartment of what we think that it means. Okay, so basic training of the elements, just building familiarity, really building the element, the actual energy of it, so the astral body can strengthen in relation with that element. That becomes very important. And then, of course, you work that into a realization of the equanimity substance, and you build a resilience with that, and you build the equanimity into the astral body. And this serves some wonderful purposes as you move forward on the path. Okay, I hope you found this helpful and a fun exploration of the spiritual path and the relationship between dissolving ourselves and evolving ourselves and resolving ourselves, and freedom from internal and external manipulation. Once again, thanks for watching. If you're interested in training, please check out the website. There are retreats that I teach. These are pretty potent, high-intensity retreats. We do a lot of energy work. There's a lot of work with nature and deep connection with different spheres, realms, different aspects of the vibrational scale and energy. And they're a lot of fun, and there's a lot of transformation that goes on. You can also become a member on the website. There is the Tai Chi program, and of course the Hermetic Alchemy, Qigong and meditation program. And along with these, you get access to the Zenden, which is a Q&A video reference library. This is where I get back to you via video with for any questions that you might have. And this is, of course, to help aid in your clarity and forward movement along the path. All right, that's it. Thanks again for watching and for your time. Have fun, practice. Bye.